So before we get into today's video, I want to give you guys a huge thank you for all the kind words on my video from the other day, for the messages. A lot of people reached out to me. I sincerely appreciate it. You know, there's going to be days that are good. There's going to be days that are bad dealing with this situation. And everything just kind of came to a head the other day, and I was just really stressed out. But, you know, hopefully things will get better as time goes on. But thank you for checking in on me. I sincerely appreciate it, and it means a lot to me. But moving on, we do have some video game news to talk about, primarily with Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards. Sort of the bane of existence for a lot of Nintendo Switch 2 players. A lot of people, at least online and on the social media spheres, seem to be really against the game key card. It's not a full physical version, it's not a true physical version, so on and so forth. And I think thus far we've seen that there are many wrinkles with this sort of mindset. There are lots of different reasons why a company or why a publisher would choose to do a game key card over a traditional physical release on the Switch 2. Some of it comes down to cost, some of it comes down to the size of the game itself. And now we actually have yet another wrinkle in this situation, and it's something that I don't think people really put too much stock into until somebody involved with a company that recently released a game key card on the Switch 2 came out and pretty much said, we had to do this. We couldn't do this any other way. So this is involving Star Wars Outlaws and Ubisoft, which of course just released on the Nintendo Switch 2 recently. And this was a game that I still don't really love the game or like the game or anything like that. Like it's fine, you know, it's okay. I think it could have been a lot better, but I was more so interested in the port of the game. I played it on the Xbox Series X and beat the game, and I wanted to see how it would run on the Switch 2. And the lack of footage, the lack of any sort of, you know, coverage on the Switch 2 version of the game kind of made me leery about this port. And I expected the worst for this port, to be perfectly honest with you guys. I expected this to be an absolute train wreck of a situation. And that kind of comes down to the fact that we never really saw the Switch 2 version of the game, which, you know, that's also a conversation for another day about, well, why don't companies show off the Switch 2 version to let people know what they're getting into? But we'll talk about that another day. We of course got some preliminary information out of PAX West, and it was very mixed reports. And then the game came out, and this is a damn good port. And I said that in my video, I was completely wrong about this game. I thought this was going to be an absolute nightmare, an absolute train wreck, a game that I was going to dunk on for not only being a mediocre game at its core, but now we have a bad port. But no, this is one of the more impressive ports on the Nintendo Switch 2. Digital Foundry did their thing, and they looked at stuff. They saw that there was ray tracing, reflections, and frame pacing that's better than what's on the Xbox Series S. And this is a game that only released on the PS5 and the Xbox Series and PC. So it's not like this is an older game where just for whatever reason it didn't run really well on the Series S. No, this was designed with these systems in mind. And like I said, you know, I'm still not a huge fan of the core game itself, but I am a fan of the port. And I think it's very impressive whether you're playing it in handheld mode or in docked mode. They did a good job. But this, of course, was a game key card. And this game came in around 20 gigabytes on the Switch 2, so of course you have to crucify Ubisoft for putting it on a game key card and cheaping out. And, you know, not to say that Ubisoft is a saint, because they do stuff wrong all the time, but if there's a situation where it was done for a very specific reason that they went with a game key card, I think it does change the conversation. So in regards to Star Wars Outlaws on the Nintendo Switch 2, there was a thread over on Blue Sky, which I'm probably not allowed on Blue Sky that John Linneman had started up, and basically was talking with someone about the game. One of the people said, oh, it's a game key card. Why is it a game key card? They're cheaping out, blah, blah, blah. And then someone who actually works at Ubisoft and works with the engine Snowdrop, which is what is used in Star Wars Outlaws, actually chimed in. Snowdrop relies heavily on disc streaming for its open world environments, and we found the Nintendo Switch 2 physical cards, I did add the word physical in there, simply don't give the performance we need at the quality target we were going for. I don't recall the cost of the cards ever entering the discussion because it was moot. And then John Linneman follows up and says, okay, so I was right then. I had a feeling that might be the case given the amount of streaming going on in that game/engine and based on results we saw with other Switch 2 cart games. And then the developer over at Ubisoft said, I think if we had designed a game for the Switch 2 from the ground up, it might have been different. As it was, we built a game around the SSDs of the initial target platforms, and then made the Switch 2 came along a while later. In this case, I think our leadership made the right call. And this actually brings up a lot of different discussion points to be having here. First and foremost, I believe that this person is being 100% truthful in this, because even if you remember going back to Mario Kart World, I believe it was Digital Foundry that actually reported that if the game was downloaded digitally onto a micro SD card or onto the system, it actually booted up faster than the cartridge version of the game did. So that right there is setting a precedent. Now, it wasn't a huge difference or anything like that, but it was noticeable enough for them to notice it and actually talk about it and discuss it in a video. And when you're talking about how Nintendo handles things when it comes to the games and whatnot, you can't just install the game onto the system like it does with, so if you have a physical version of a game, you have a standard physical version, the game is being read off of the cartridge of the game. It's not being installed onto the system like you see on PS5 and Xbox games. Well, especially PS5, because let's be real, well, you know, there are physical Xbox games, but when you get like an Xbox or a PS5 game and you pop in that disc, it has to install the disc onto the system itself. Why does it have to do that? Because it's utilizing the SSD in the PS5 to get optimal performance levels. The Nintendo Switch 2 does not do that. The Nintendo Switch 2 is reading the data off of the cartridge itself and not installing it onto the system, and there is no option to do that as it stands right now. And then it brings upon a bigger discussion point, because I've seen people, you know, saying some crazy stuff online like, well, you know, if they had to make the game look worse and run a little bit worse to get it on a physical cartridge, I would have rather had that than a game key card and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, dude, you are entitled to your opinion, but I don't like your opinion, because I do not want to sacrifice the quality of a game running on the system just because you can't understand the fact that, you know, there needs to be some changes done to the Switch 2, whether, you know, Nintendo decides to allow companies to have installs from the cartridge onto the system or whatever the case may be. But I'm not willing to diminish my experience with this game because you want a physical cartridge that, realistically speaking, you know, a vast majority of people probably don't care one way or another. I do get it. You know, there is a large contingency of people that want physical products and demand physical products. And more often than not, I do like physical products. But if it's coming at the cost of the quality of the game, I don't think this needs to be a discussion. I think the discussion really needs to be, well, if Nintendo would allow for game companies to have it so where it installs the data off of the cartridge onto the Nintendo Switch 2 system, and then they can utilize the system and the storage of the system to get the read-write speeds that they need in order to have their game run properly, I think that is a much better and a much more reasonable solution to this situation, because now we have so many different reasons that game key cards exist. You know, it's not just because companies want to be cheap or because companies don't want to, work on their game file size in order to get it running on the Switch 2. It's because in some cases, there is a necessity to it. And as this generation goes on and bigger and better games come along, you're going to be running into more situations like this. You're going to be running into more complex engines that may need to be able to utilize the streaming stuff, the disc streaming, which is now being done digitally on the system via the game key card. And if that's the case, would you rather the game not come to the system at all or have a severely diminished version just so that you can have your physical edition? For me personally, I'm going to have to say no. If it's got to be a game key card or a digital download in order to get the best running, the best looking, and the best playing version natively on the Nintendo Switch 2, then I will deal with it. I will buy a micro SD express card. I already have multiple ones. I got a 500 gig. I got a 200 gig. Like, I'm booted up and zooted up when it comes to these SD cards. But, this is something that we haven't heard a company kind of say out loud. But now that we've heard it, it kind of does make sense. And it kind of does, set a potential precedent going forward with certain games that, maybe the developer would love for it and the publisher would love for it to be on a physical cartridge. But if it's not feasible for the game engine and the game needs to, would suffer in terms of quality, because nobody's going to buy a bad Switch 2 cartridge physical game over a game key card or a digital download that looks and runs better. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. And this is just my opinion, by the way. This is just how I kind of view it and my mentality on this, because give me the better version. Give me the highest quality version you can do on the Switch 2, because this is a very capable system. And it pains me to see these half-ass ports that are coming to the system when that these companies can do more. And it seems like we're getting, more and more games on the system that are very impressive. So let me know in the comments section down below. What do you think about this? Would you rather have a physical version of the game that is a diminished quality? Do you understand why game key cards are kind of a necessity and why we need these things? Would you like to see Nintendo allow installations off of the cartridge so that companies can potentially avoid that? I think that's the happy medium here. I don't know if Nintendo feels like that could, open the door to piracy or something like that. There's every little thing. It's very nuanced. There are multiple ways to look at all of these different things, and some people just would rather just stay in their echo chamber and never listen to anything else. But that's cool, man. It's your opinion at the end of the day. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to check out my full Star Wars Outlaws video, although I probably used a lot of footage for it in this video because I don't feel like being on camera today. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.